Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Griffin. I am a product leader and product coach, and this is the Product Mind Lab again. Today, I am joined by John Stokvis. I hope I said that right
You got
after.
it. No, that was it.
Wonderful. Excellent. Excellent. And John is a product manager who has worked at Indiegogo, Twitter, and Groupon, though he also says, please don't pay attention to his titles. Pay attention to things he says. And I'm actually having him on today because we talk a lot about AI and what its implications are, especially in tech, and also the future of the product team and how we do our work as product managers and what are all the implications. And John and I were having this conversation the other day, and actually shout out to Shreya Stoshi's, improving your product sense course, because that's how we met, and we're in this community together because of it. We were having this conversation the other day, and I was like, I need people to hear John's thoughts about how this is shifting, our work as product managers. And yeah, I'm actually just going to go into the first question, John, because you and I are really both into mythology, and I actually think this is going to help us see a bigger picture than just, okay, here's this cool little tool or hack. But is there a myth that you feel aligns really well with the transformation that we're seeing in tech organizations with AI right now?
It's a funny question, because we've talked a lot about myths, and like I grew up as like a mythology nerd, reading Greek myths to myself at like 12 years old, falling asleep, mostly because I found them as ways of like understanding the world. That's like the cool thing about myths. And I think a lot of people mistake them as like literal. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not like mirrors. They don't say like this is literally true. They're more like lenses. They're like, the world is so big and so hard to understand in words. So like here's a story that kind of hints at like the way the world is.
Like the macro and the micro of the world.
Yeah.
And it gives you that view.
Exactly. So you can kind of like pull out pieces of certain myths from the past that kind of reflect like certain truths about today. And there's like this concept of a Shoggoth going around, this idea of this like a H.P. Lovecraft thing of this like big blobby monster with like a happy face that like eats your soul or something, which I think is okay. Like it's scary and catchy, and there's lots of memes about it. But one that there were two that kind of came to me. So the first one was Pandora's Box, which is, the story of
incredibly
Pandora,
relevant.
Right? It, opening up the box and all the heroes of the horrors of the world kind of come out of it. And then left behind is hope, right? So it's kind of like this, you can think of it as a cautionary tale. It's also very like the Adam and Eve story, where Pandora was the first woman created by, I think his name was Hephaestus, the like god of forge out of clay and kind of given to humanity. There's a little bit of like misogyny in there about how all the horrors and evils of the world came from a woman. But what I found really interesting when I was like going back and like, I better make sure I know this myth, is that it's not actually a box. So we know Pandora's box, right?
That's I didn't even realize that. Yeah.
In the original Greek, the word is pithos, which means jar. And sometime in like the 16th century, it was mistranslated into from a different Greek word, meaning box. So it was actually, she was opening this jar, which would often contain, oils and other such things. And out of that came the horrors. And what's interesting about that is that the jars were also made out of clay. So there's this idea contained in the story that like both Pandora and the box, the jar, are made of the same material, which I think is really interesting when you think about like what AI is, what generative AI is.
That seems like a really important detail.
It's literally us. Like it's trained on all of the world's words and images. It's contained in there. So this idea that like it is some oracle, super intelligence, okay, maybe it's actually really just like all of us. It's made of our stuff. And when we open it up, all of the horrors of the world come out, but also the hope is contained in there as well. Right?
Yeah.
So it's really about like it's just more understanding that like this thing that we're working with now is just us. It's just humans in a like different form. So
That
that was one thing that kind of
I
struck me
love
about.
that lens. And I love that lens. It's just us and that balance of, yes, all the horrors and bad things are in there, but also the hope piece as
Yeah.
well. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And you touched on a really important thing that people so often think of AI as this super intelligent thing. Even if you put the AGI conversations, for those of people who
Mhm.
are not familiar with that, the artificial general intelligence, you put those conversations aside. If an AI says something, you have people where they just assume it's correct. One of the most I'll say popular examples, but most widely used examples is of that lawyer several years ago who
Right.
used ChatGPT for his court
Just
case,
making
and it
up
used
court cases.
made up previous court cases
Yeah.
that never existed.
Yeah.
And this has actually been a pattern in AI for a while, or using the tools of AI, where people just assume because AI created something that it fact checked or it's somehow smarter than them or other
Hmm.
people. And this is something where I got it from Twitter, so I cannot verify if this information is true or not. But there was someone who was claiming to be an instructor on Twitter, and they were getting all these garbage essays.
Hmm.
And there was one student where they were like, "Hey, this is clearly ChatGPT. This is not very good." And they, instead of just saying like, "I'm going to fail you, I'm not going to talk about it," they had this conversation with the kid, and they were like, "Hey, if you just rewrite this essay yourself, I will give you part of the credit for it."
Hmm.
And the person rewrote it. And again, this is from Twitter, so who knows if this is real or this is just like great like clickbait story that was made up. You never know with Twitter. But this person said the essay they actually wrote was significantly better than the one they got from ChatGPT. And the instructor was curious, well, like, well, this is great. You're pretty good at writing this stuff. Why would you use ChatGPT? And this student said they just thought that ChatGPT made better essays, was better at this, smarter than this. And so
Hmm.
it's also impacting things, I think obviously with adults, but also kids. We just have this assumption, but at the end of the day, it is just us.
Yeah. It's funny. It connects it. So the second myth you could put in quotes that
Yeah.
it made me think of was the Wizard of Oz, which I know is
Oh,
not technically a myth, but like in our
yeah.
culture at this point, it's a very commonly known story.
Yeah.
It's kind of reached that mythical status. And the
Yeah.
aspect of that story is the wizard himself, right?
Ooh.
So he's revealed as a fraud, right? It's like the great and mythical Oz. He's this big head in the movie, and he's just like all powerful. And then Toto moves the curtain, and you realize he's just this like little old man, manipulating everything. It's all a trick. It's all a magic trick. Which I have a background in theater, um, and so I kind of like it clicked for me a little quickly that like what ChatGPT is doing, what these generative AI things are doing, is a lot like a magic trick. It's
Very true.
it's not so much thinking any more than like David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. It felt like he did. It feels like it's thinking, but it's not. It's using transformers to kind of do the next predictive text based on all its training data, right? And the part of the Wizard of Oz that it resonates with me is, despite the fact that like the wizard is revealed as a fraud, he bestows upon the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion these gifts to say like, you have brains, you have heart, you have courage, without them realizing that previously in the story, in the movie, they've actually exhibited those things in the first place. Like they have those things already, but they needed basically a magic trick, a fraud, to draw it out of them, right?
That's also incredibly so insightful, and it reminds me so much of how the human brain functions also on placebos.
Hmm.
Of
Exactly.
even when something's not real, so much of it is what our neurons believe are real and how that shifts things. I love
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
love
And it
that.
speaks to like how we can use this technology, right? Like putting aside, I know we shouldn't do it, but like putting aside some of the ethics of the training of it and the building of it and the use of it, to use it in a way that draws out your humanity as opposed to replacing it feels like
Yes.
the right tack.
Yes. I think that's a really important thing. And I know, oh my gosh. This piece alone is like, like we could actually spend the whole time
Yeah, how
talking
much
about
time do you
this.
have?
No, but I mean, I want to touch on this is, using it to bring out that humanity, because that's something I've been very passionate about since I first started actually learning more about AI in 2017. And I think that's the piece so many people miss. And also why I think a lot of these I don't think having a ChatGPT wrapper is wrong, but so many people are doing it wrong in that you are just creating a thing that also still feels robotic. And
Yeah.
I truly believe the AI tools that are going to be the most successful are going to be the things that draw that humanity out of us rather than trying to replace that humanity.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that. I'm going to ask you about something we
Mm,
talked about the other day, and it was
mm,
a really thoughtful observation. You mentioned a lot of the old institutions, corporations
mm.
included, are failing because the fundamental premise for them was built in a world without internet. And now it's a world with internet and AI. So, what do you think will survive in this new world?
So first of all, I can't take credit for this observation. It's not mine.
Okay.
Ben Thompson, who writes Stratechery and has a whole bunch of podcasts, he's the one who kind of introduced me to it. And he's got a whole long thread kind of talking about contrasting the printing press as a fundamental technology that kind of reorganized the world, from the old world of like Catholic Church being the kind of dominant institution to the nation state, and that the internet itself is like another kind of foundational technology that is kind of reorienting the world, which was built around the nation state and the Enlightenment and all that stuff, in like a new way. So he can, if you go look up
Okay.
Stratechery, it's
Okay.
amazing.
Yeah. I'm a big
He
fan. I'm a big fan.
his whole thread, he articulates it way better than I ever could. But what I love about that as a lens to kind of look at things is that it feels like we're in like this psychic earthquake where like everything foundational is
Yes.
shaking and crumbling, and we're kind of looking around like, what is stable? And the answer is like nothing, because everything was built up over. We're talking like, when did Gutenberg build the printing press? In like the
Is it?
1400s.
I think
I don't even remember.
so.
A
I
long
can't.
time. It's a long
Okay,
time. We're
once it
talking.
gets past once we get past like the 1800s, my memory of which century we were in gets a little fuzzy.
It's hundreds and hundreds of years, like
Yeah.
bigger than any and all of us. And so the like the scary thing is like, well, yeah, everything around us, from like the way that we organize society to the way that we communicate information, is built on the premise of like information is dispersed through something built out of the printing press, right? And that's, books and newspapers and film and TV and radio. Like these are all kind of like iterations of that. This idea that like if you control the printing press, you can endlessly replicate stuff, and then power comes from like having the ability to distribute it, right, across like wherever you can go. And then the farther you distribute the more expensive it gets. So you wind up with these kind of like local centers, which evolve into nation states that have their own governments, which again, the foundational text of the United States is the Constitution, which was printed on a printing press and distributed, right? Like it's all kind of connected in that way. And the internet is fundamentally different because time and space kind of don't matter. Like you can
No.
effectively reach someone in Bangladesh as easily as I could reach someone next door, right?
Yeah.
Like, and
Sometimes
and
faster.
anyone can do that faster,
Yeah.
easier,
Yeah.
cheaper. The cost of distribution is effectively zero. And
Yeah.
so all of these institutions that are built on like distribution costing something, don't make sense anymore, right? Like, and they have to kind of like crumble or be reorganized or evolve in a different way. Um, and it sounds really scary, but at least like seeing that that's what's happening is comforting, because it means that like it's not like the whole world, it's not like apocalypse is happening, right? Like
Yeah.
even you look at the first transition that we talked about from like
Yeah.
the church as the centralizing
Mm.
authority to
Yeah.
the nation
Yeah.
state. The Catholic Church is still around and is actually still, for all of its issues, relatively powerful. It's not like
Yes.
countries are going to go away. Definitely
Yeah.
not in our lifetime, and maybe even after hundreds of years, like countries will still be things.
Yes.
They just might not be the like foundational organizing
Mm.
locus of power that they
Yeah.
have been. But we'll come up with some new ones based on the assumptions of like, now that the internet exists, now that
Yeah.
this technology that allows for like easy distribution and anyone can connect with anyone anywhere at any time, like how do we build on top of that?
Yeah. I think of going back to Pandora's jar.
Yeah.
It's all the bad things, but also that hope
Yeah.
in there
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. It's like not to get super religious, but like the Taoist idea that like, if you look at that yin yang symbol, that those two dots, which represent, the potential for at the
Yes.
point of most yin or the point of most yang, there, that is where the potential for the opposite exists, right? So it's
Yes.
like
Yes.
when things fall apart, there is now potential for like rebirth and renewal.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Offline we're going to have so many more conversations because I mean there's so much in mythology that ties to that where you can't really have the new beginning without like something else being destroyed. And even like think about department stores and how online retail and e-commerce completely upended, whereas before, even thinking about catalog first, right? Like the
Hmm.
Sears Roebuck company, whereas like it
Hmm.
was revolutionary to have a catalog you could order from. And I remember as a kid ordering things from a catalog, and it took time for them to get the order with the physical check in it, and then it'd be another
Hmm.
like 2 to 3 weeks after.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and that way of doing business, I'm sure someone's maybe still doing it that way, but it is not the primary way anymore.
Yeah. 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 And you think about like what kind of products would you be able to order it, like in a business structured that way? They would be probably, I mean, they would be cool, but they would be pretty generic because you have to appeal to kind of a broad audience.
Yeah,
Whereas now, like if your target market for this specialized shirt or whatever is like 1,000 people,
yeah,
you can still make it because
yeah,
there's two people over here, there's two people over there, there's
yep,
three people over there, and you can reach all of them for basically free, and you can get that T-shirt to them for get a Shopify account, but
yeah,
like effectively like free.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I want to shift to talking about Cursor. There's
Mm,
a lot of so one of the things I talk a lot about is prototyping, and one of the things you and I have talked about a bit is also prototyping, but in a way that you're the one that's driving it and not letting the computer tell you what it thinks it
yeah.
should build. But you're using Cursor. Can you tell me more about what you're building and why Cursor has been your tool of choice?
um well, I'll start with the second one first. Cursor, it was just the like first one that I was like, oh, that worked. I tried a bunch of, I think Vercel has one. I tried a Copilot, and like, I don't write code. I talk to engineers all and designers all the time as a product manager, but like, that was just the first one that I was like, I saw some YouTube video of like, oh, here's what you do. And I was like, oh, I can talk to a tool and just like give it instructions. And I
Yeah,
tried it and it worked. Um, and I think back to like, what we were saying before about
yeah,
kind of bringing out the humanity, is that it was just like a problem that I wanted to solve. Like
yeah,
it was like a stupid small thing that
yeah,
no one that I cared about, but
yeah,
I would never in a million years have asked any developer like, hey, can you build this for me?
yeah,
Because it was like, I'm reading Blue Sky threads, Twitter threads, whatever, and I'm like, I want to be able to just, there's a an essay here and I want to write about it. And I want to just like grab the essay, but try to like highlight it all and then click
Yeah.
copy and paste. I get all the other junk. I get the date stamps and
Yep.
the at
Ah.
names. So I was like, it'd be nice to have a button that I could just click that says copy
Oh.
thread. And I was like, let's just see if I can do this. And
Yeah.
it took me like 35 minutes to build a Chrome
Amazing.
extension, just like telling it what to do the way I would have told an engineer, like, okay, I want it to look like this and I want it to have this color
Mm.
and I want it to be able to do this. Like, how do I create a Chrome extension? Oh, I have to do the, oh, okay. And I have to, okay, I have to go to developer mode. Okay. And I have to load it like this. Like, it helped me set itself up.
Yeah.
And then I just gave it the instructions and it spit out some code and I stuck it in and tried it and it didn't work. And I was like, oh, here's the error I got. It was like, oh, right here. How about let me modify the code? Okay, save. And then I uploaded it and it worked. And I was like, wow, that was the light bulb moment when I was like, I can just, I know from past experience how to very clearly articulate
Yes.
what I want
Yes.
to designers and to developers. That's literally like all a product manager does,
Yes.
work through others, through influence.
Yeah.
And so now it just became like working with an infinitely patient tool to be like, zhuzh it like this, zhuzh it like this. No, that's not. Change it like this, change it like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tried something a little bit more advanced after I did that. That was kind of like it was another Chrome extension to kind of play around with. There was this idea when I was working at Twitter where I'd noticed a lot of people were creating threads, but then they were connecting those threads to each other through
Oh,
quote
yes.
tweets.
Oh,
So it was like
yes.
not only are there like vertical threads of ideas, there's also like horizontal threads of ideas where you can just kind of like follow a thought through all these things. And I thought, I wonder, it would be really cool to build a tool for these people to like quote tweet themselves, right? To kind of like search, I'm typing something out and I would love to search for my past tweets to kind of
Oh, I love
add a
that.
quote tweet, right? Just make
Yeah.
it really easy. Because, right,
Yeah.
you have to like go search for it and then click copy and paste. And like, if you're doing this a lot, it would be really nice to just kind of like, oh yeah, here's a bunch of old tweets that I made, like push a button, stick it in here. So I've long since left Twitter, but I've been playing around with Blue Sky, and because Blue Sky is like an open protocol, a lot of this stuff is just public. You don't really need an API key. And so I started working with Cursor to like build a little Chrome extension for myself to write threads that searched for my own quote tweets and gave me a button to like stick it in there.
That's
And it was really
incredible.
fun, right? Because I
Yeah.
got to like create, and I think this is kind of what you were getting at earlier, like a working prototype to kind
Yes.
of
Yes.
see, like, does this work? Does this make
Yeah.
sense? Like, what's wrong with the user experience?
Yeah.
Because like if you're doing it in your head, like
Yeah.
everything works perfectly in your head, and the user behaves perfectly in your head.
Exactly.
But if you're
Until
until they actually use it, right? That's why MVP exists or CLP or all these silly acronyms. Like, it's just get your product in your users' hands to see to validate if it's actually what they want. And then, but by being able to do that to myself, it was like an even faster feedback loop. Like, I got to validate with myself if my assumptions about how I would behave, how I would use this particular product
Yeah.
made any sense. And actually, I didn't start as a Chrome extension. I was like, I'm going to build a whole app, right? And then I
Yeah.
was like, wait a second. If I do that, I started doing that, and I was like, wait, now I have to account for logging in, and I have to account for a composer, and I have to account for all of this stuff. And I was like, you know what? We've already got a composer. What if I tried a different approach
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
went with a Chrome extension? So I was like, okay, it almost like helped me converse better with myself of like trying out different approaches well before I would ever have even talked to a designer or developer.
I love that.
So I think it's a really cool like communication tool because it allows for like self-validating a lot of assumptions.
Yeah. Even that part where you said, hey, I thought I was going to build a whole app. And then I realized, oh man, this is actually a pain in the butt when I log into to an app that was doing all these things.
I wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you realize like once it's physically there, right? And I mean, obviously there's some level of thinking you did beforehand, but then having this prototyping take that thinking to the next level to help you deal with those assumptions. And I'm curious also with
Mm,
these tools like Cursor and other prototyping tools like Replit, V0, it's making it easier than ever for people to build products.
mm.
What do you think that means for the future of product management now that AI makes it so easy and cheap to build products?
I like this question because it evokes it evokes like all of these hot takes that people have about like here's why design is going away and here's why engineers are going to run the show or no, here's why engineers are going to go away and here's why product is going to run the show. All of this like silly like weird competition
Yeah.
clickbait stuff. um I always try to talk about when I'm working with a team like we're the product team, right? The kind of like triumvirate of like product design and engineering. We have our distinct kind of roles and responsibilities and skills and backgrounds, but like we are together the product team or whatever you want to call it. Like we are all jointly responsible for the success of whatever it is that we're building, right? Both customer satisfaction, meeting the customer's needs, and like the business success, because you got to make money if you want to be an ongoing concern.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think the what's interesting is that if you kind of think about what these different roles do, there are two aspects to them. You could think of one as like there's the creative aspect, and then there's like the execution aspect, right? So like for a product manager, it would be the creative aspect would be like having insights, doing research, talking to customers, prototyping, understanding the business models, et cetera. And then the execution part would be like writing requirements and like communicating effectively. For a designer, it would be like understanding user psychology and user behavior and empathizing with users. And then the execution part would be like creating Figma mockups. And then for the engineer, obviously, it's like understanding system design and all of this other stuff, and
Mm,
then
mm,
writing code. And I think what AI code would be like the executive part. And I think what generative AI does is it brings down the barrier on the execution parts, because like writing code is hard. Building designs in Figma is not easy. It's a specialized skill. I know something about design. I know something about code, but I don't have the time or background or expertise to like learn how to do those things. But like it's now easier because
yes.
generative AI exists, right? And so what becomes more valuable are those creative aspects. Like
Yeah.
who on the team or what percentage of your time and energy on the team is contributing value in terms of like understanding the customer, understanding the competition,
Mm,
understanding differentiation. How are we positioned in the market?
yeah.
Like what is the system design? How can we build on top of it, right? Like what's the roadmap look like? Understanding all of that stuff is where the value lies.
Mm,
And there's this. I heard this silly metaphor. It's a war metaphor, and I never like war metaphors. I think they're so cheap and boring and dumb. But this one was like, there are barrels and there are and there are bullets, right? There's like people who like point the gun, and there's people who are like the ammunition that you shoot, and you want to like grab get as many barrels as you can and reward them and like give them bullets to shoot,
yeah.
which I don't like. I don't like it for the war metaphor part. I also don't like it because it feels very static. It feels like people are
Yeah.
just like born this way as opposed to like it's just the circumstances that they're in. I prefer this idea of like this metaphor of like an artist, right?
Yeah.
Where you think about artists like Van Gogh or Hokusai or like these like amazing artists throughout
Yeah.
history who both were incredibly skilled, right? They were executing, they had the talent, but
Yeah.
then they also had something to say, right?
Yes.
And you compare them to the folks who had talent,
Hmm.
other impressionists, other woodblock printers who were good, but like they just didn't have much to say, right?
Yes.
They're kind
Yes.
of lesser. And then you think about the people who did have something to say, but like they weren't born into the right family, or like they just were too busy surviving to like develop oil painting skills. Like You don't hear from them at all, but they had the ideas,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so what art did the world miss out on simply because the barrier to entry to expressing
Mm.
those ideas was too high,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
even for, and that's kind of what generative AI will do. I mean, in general, but like in the workplace, is that like the people who have ideas now on to execute them, the barriers are lower. It's not zero, but it's much, much lower. And so there's going to be a lot of crap, of course, but there's going to be more good ideas that come out that just could never have gotten over that threshold.
Yeah. Yeah. I do agree. I do think like we will have companies that will like kind of what they tried to do with certain design and research teams where they're like, oh, we don't need as many of them.
Mm.
And I think they might see like, oh, we don't need as many engineers, or we don't need as many PMs, but I don't know if they can completely get rid of them. And I think some companies will preemptively try to headcount reduce in those ways. But I think it ties back to what you said about the piece where, when I think you got it from Ben Thompson, this is a world where it was built on this assumption of no
Yes.
internet, or the very
Yes.
early internet minus AI.
Yes.
And we don't, there's going to be, I think, a lot of upheaval and trial and error of like, what does that team look like? How
Yeah.
big are certain departments? But I think it'll be hard, given how many people are trained in certain areas, to get those skills at that level, that to have those people be creative, even if the execution barriers are lower. Like you can't just replace them with other
Yeah.
people who maybe they don't have that creative muscle as strong in certain areas, to just say, oh, we don't need any designers, or we don't need any engineers, we don't need any PMs.
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be really, really hard and stressful because it's this transition, right? Like we talked about, the foundations are kind of shaky, and new companies will form built on those assumptions, and they'll probably be like stronger and faster and nimbler than the ones that are trying to kind of port themselves over into this new world. But I feel like the optimist in me, the realist in me, is actually like that. Every human, every person has something that they are passionate and that they care about, you know, and it's like there are more, especially when, if you imagine there's like 1,000 skills that you could be good at, right? You don't, there's only 1,000 people that can be the best in that thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
uh, no one is, no one has just one skill, right? People have multiple skills. So if you kind of look at the skills that you are uniquely, maybe not the best at, but like pretty good at, you know, good enough at that, like you enjoy doing them, you would pay other people to do them. You do them in your spare time, you do them for fun. And other people are like, why are you doing that? Like, why do you clean the house for fun? No one likes to clean the house. And you're like, but I like organizing things. It's just, I like seeing neat stuff. It's just what I like.
Marie Kondo made a whole empire.
Whatever it is, right? Like you kind of can tell if it's the thing that like you would do regardless. You would do if someone didn't pay you, or even you pay other people to do that thing.
Yeah.
And then you just develop those skills. So you become the one person in the world who has like top 75% level skills in like these three things. And now you're talking like hundreds of billions of possible combinations. And because the barriers to entry of like actually executing on those things are now so much lower, your chances of success are greater.
Yes.
So it all comes back to what we were saying before, right? It's like more human. Just more human. Just take this as an opportunity to like stop being like just a cog in the machine who like takes someone else's orders and executes them, and leverage this new thing to create what it is that you want to create for yourself. Start with yourself. Like, do the thing for yourself and for no one else.
I love that. So I think if anything we get out of this conversation today is, I say, like, leveraging AI in a way that allows us to, enhance our humanness, our humanity, and also
More humanity.
exercise our creativity.
Yeah. More
Yeah,
humanity, more life.
I love
That's what it's
that,
all about.
John. It has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so
I
I'm
love
so
these
excited
talks.
for. I know, me too. I'm so excited for all of our future conversations. I thank you for being on the Product Mind Lab. I'm super excited to share this with
This
my
has been great.
subscribers. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, thank you for being here. Any final things you want to leave everyone with?
Deep breaths.
Deep breaths. Okay, deep breaths. Thank you, everyone. Bye.